What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. And man, since I last posted, things have changed a little bit. A zombie apocalypse has started, so a lot of people are staying in the house, including myself. And with that said, I've been here working on a new piece of content. Got a new graphics card in here, so if you guys have $300 to spend, I think this is one that you're going to be interested in. This is the Radeon RX 5600 XT, and this is specifically a model from XFX. They actually sent this out to me to take a look at. This is being advertised as more of a mid-range graphics card for 1080p gaming. Looks like it's probably going to be more for a 1080p high refresh rate gaming. We'll see once we run some benchmarks. But if we take this thing out of the box, we can see it's got 200mm fans on it. You've got this black fan shroud that's pretty simple, just has an XFX logo on the side there. No RGB on here, which is pretty consistent with the thick coolers. By the way, this is the thick 2 because it only has 2 fans on it, as opposed to the thick 3, which has 3 fans on it. I know it's pretty complicated, but stay with me. If we flip the card over, it's got an aluminum backplate on it, just a nice and simple XFX branding there. I will say the fan shroud in general feels a little bit more solid than the thick 2 cooler on the RX 580. I know they're really similar, but I'm guessing maybe this one is just, maybe this was designed around this PCB so it fits a little better. I'm not sure, but I just think it feels a little bit more solid. So you guys can see the heatsink just underneath the fans. It's got 4 copper heat pipes running through it. There's an 8-pin PCIe connector on one side with a BIOS switch just to the left of that. I'm not really sure if you guys can see it on camera, but basically this will switch the card between a performance oriented mode and a more silent oriented mode. By default, of course, it is on the performance oriented one. It still does have a 0 dB fan mode though, so once the temps drop to a certain level, the fans will actually disable in order to keep the card quiet. And then on the I/O side, we've got 3 DisplayPort connectors and 1 HDMI. Overall, a pretty simple card in terms of design, but does look pretty nice. Anyway, let's go ahead and throw this thing in my system so we can test it out. By the way, this is going in the main rig because I was running a GTX 1070 prior to this, and we know this one is faster, so I'll throw in a couple benchmarks so you guys can just get a idea of where I was coming from. But with this system, I'm running a Ryzen 7 1700. I know I'm still on first gen Ryzen. Hey, sponsor me, baby. Somebody sponsor me. This is running at 3.9 gigahertz. We've got 16 gigabytes of RAM running at 2933 megahertz. And then of course, this graphics card. I know this card may kill your vibe a little bit if you guys are into RGB because there's nothing coming from that area, but doesn't really bother me, man. I'm all about the performance first. So as long as it performs well and it doesn't sound annoying, that's all we can ask for. Okay, so now that I got the card installed, let's take a look at the clocks. Now, if you've been following the 5600 XT since launch, you'll notice that these numbers look a little bit different than what you may be seeing online. And that is because right after these cards dropped, AMD released a VBIOS update, which actually bumped up the power delivery, the core clock, and the memory clock. Now, it is important to mention that on this specific XFX card, the memory clock was not boosted. So it's still at 1500 instead of the 1750 that was in the AMD update. And I'm not really sure why they did that. I don't know if there's maybe a difference in some of the memory chips that are out there being put into cards, and so some of them aren't stable or something like that. And I don't think XFX is the only brand that did this. I think MSI has a card like this as well, where the memory clock is still at 1500. So just keep that in mind if you're shopping for them. Some of them are going to have a memory clock speed of 1750 and some are going to be 1500. I'm hoping though if we manually overclock the memory, we'll be able to hit 1750 without any issues. Here's a look at how the game performs when I'm playing Modern Warfare multiplayer. You can see that even though the peak boost clock is 1780, the actual in-game clock was only hitting about 1725, 1726, something like that. As far as temps go, the hottest I saw was about 77 degrees Celsius with the fan speed running about 12 to 1300 RPM. So we're well within our safe zone there, and that's on the default fan curve. Hopefully that holds up as well when we do a little bit of manual overclocking.
6 hours later.
Fast forward a little bit of time and you can see I do have an overclock on the card. I've got the Heaven benchmark running in the background, and this will kind of get you in the general ballpark in terms of an overclock. I don't think this program is taxing enough to really test the true stability of an overclock, but it'll get you started pretty much. So you can see I haven't made any adjustments to the core voltage at all. That's still at the factory setting. I tried to go a little bit lower, actually like way down to like 900 millivolts, and that's when it was unstable. So for the time being, I didn't really care to fine tune it that much, so I just kind of left it as is. Bumped the power limit up to plus 20%, and then on the core clock, we actually got this maxed out all the way to 1820. This is as far as AMD will actually allow you to overclock the card, so you can't actually put the slider any further. And then same with the memory clock, which is at 1860. So that's actually even farther than the 1750 that AMD bumped it up to in their VBIOS update. And temps didn't increase too much either. We're sitting at just under 80 C. So that's with the default fan curve, by the way. So in terms of power delivery and core clock, you really don't have that much room. We basically went from 1780 to 1820 on the core clock. Really, the biggest gains here are had on the memory clock, which again, we started from 1500. Depending on the 5600 XT card that you have, you may be going from 1750 to 1860 or 1500 to 1860, but that's where your biggest gains are going to be had on this card. Now, I should mention, when I actually tried to game using 1820 and 1860 as my overclock, it didn't actually crash, but I did have some weird like color changing going on with the card. So I actually decided to lower the memory clock speed for the benchmarks to 1750. So just keep that in mind. Also, I'm not sure what was going on when I was using MSI Afterburner though, but I was having some weird issues with like controlling the fan speed, and then sometimes I would type in a value and it wouldn't actually show the value that I typed in. Like, I don't know, something was going on that was really weird there. I'm not sure if it was on the Afterburner side or AMD side, but just keep that in mind. I don't know, they were playing weird together. I'm just throwing that out there. By the way, you can see the actual speeds we were hitting were about 1770 to 1775 when we set it to 1820 in Afterburner. And again, the value that you see in Afterburner is like the peak boost. That's going to be like the kind of max level that it can hit, but it's not actually going to run at that when you're in game. It's going to run a little bit lower. Anyway, on to the benchmarks, which I did run at 1080p and 1440p just for fun. I wanted to see kind of how the card performed at that level, even though it wasn't technically designed for that. So let's take a look at those. So first up, we have the superposition benchmark, which is a synthetic one, which I normally don't include in my testing, but I wanted to give you guys a benchmark that you could easily replicate in case you want to compare your results to mine, just because someone undoubtedly always leaves a comment on my videos saying, yo bro, I get like 100 more FPS than you, what's wrong? Even though you're not running the same benchmark or settings as me. So this is a way that you actually can and compare your results if you want to. I'll go ahead and throw in the 1440p results as well. Now for our actual gaming benchmarks, we have Call of Duty Modern Warfare. This is on the single player campaign on the proxy war map with high settings, which pretty much just means I have everything set to high that I can, and the rest of the settings are maxed out. So you guys can see here at 1080p we hit 113.05 FPS, and at 1440p we hit just under 80 FPS. So this card for 1080p high refresh rate, like I mentioned earlier, is looking pretty good. Also, you guys can see how this compares to the GTX 1070 that I was running in my system before. It's a pretty big jump in performance, man, and the 1070 was a very good card in its own right when it was first released. Even more expensive than the 5600 XT actually, but it just can't keep up at this point. So that is a very nice upgrade if you're coming from a card somewhere around that performance range. Now moving on to Destiny 2, we are running that at the highest preset, and this is kind of on the single player opening intro after you first create your character. You can see at 1080p we have just under 120 FPS, and 1440p just under 75 FPS. So pretty good performance all around there. Next up we have Wolfenstein 2, the New Colossus. This is on the Roswell level on the Ultra preset, and it just runs this game as smooth as butter, man. You can see almost 160 FPS there at 1080p, over 100 FPS at 1440p. It's actually pretty interesting. This card, even though it's being marketed as a 1080p card, could actually do some entry-level 1440p gaming. Now, I don't know if I would necessarily choose this card specifically for 1440p gaming, but if you just happen to come across a 1440p monitor at some point and you wanted to give it a try, I think it's just it's barely hitting in there if you want to kind of reach that 60 FPS target. Also, once again, as a reference, you can see the GTX 1070 performance in comparison to the 5600 XT. Now, I did have an issue benchmarking a couple games. They were both from Ubisoft. The first one is Assassin's Creed Origins on the very high preset. I seem to be experiencing a lot of micro stutter, and it was kind of just ruining the experience and ruined my benchmarks too, because the frame rates were all over the place. You look at the average FPS and things don't look too bad. Pretty much what you can expect from an Ubisoft game, because they're usually more demanding, these open world titles at least. But our 99th percentiles and our 99.9th percentiles were just kind of all over the place. You can see even overclocked, we actually ended up posting worse results somehow, just because the frame rates were so erratic. So I'm not really sure if it was a CPU issue, although I think an 8-core chip shouldn't have any issue running a game like this if, you know, maybe it was more CPU intensive, at least a modern one like the Ryzen 7 1700, which I think is still capable. I'm not really sure what the issue was, but it extended over to Watch Dogs 2 as well, which we were running on the Ultra preset. And man, look at those minimums, just not what we expect. If I just pan around the character, it's like it's smooth stutter, smooth stutter, smooth stutter. It's just, ugh. I don't quite know what the problem was with those two games, but I may end up substituting those out in the future for some more consistent performers. That is, unless we can find a fix for the stuttering issues. So overall, this was a pretty solid card, man. It actually performed very well, and the fact that you can get this card actually for under $300 now, I think they go for around $280 at the time of this video, actually makes it a really good buy. I think the only card that you would have to worry about in comparison is the 5700 non-XT. Obviously that is just a little bit better than this one, and if you can get that for a good deal, that may be one that you'd want to take a look at instead. So it just kind of depends on the pricing when you do your research, but definitely consider the 5600 XT or the 5700. If you're looking for 1440p gaming, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, even though it does fit there just in the entry level. I think you'd probably want to go with the 5700 XT as just a bare minimum for an overall good experiencing, something that you can actually enjoy for a little bit, because we don't know what's going to happen when these next generation of games come out once the new consoles launch. The 5600 XT may cut it now, but it may not cut it then. So just do your research. Overall, nice card. As long as AMD keeps the drivers in line, I think you'll be satisfied with what you buy. And that is pretty much it, people. Let me know what you think about this graphics card down in the comments below. Leave a like if you like this type of content, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Hopefully, we'll be able to go outside by then, but probably not. Anyways, I'm out of here. See you!